Hey there, folks. Well, this is in my backyard shed, so excuse the mess. Everything's packed in for the winter. But I decided to dig out my Standard Modernus bowl and 40-50 tank. And then I also decided to dig out one of my 40-60 tanks from the Ejecto and just kind of do a little comparison video and maybe discuss some of the finer details of standard toilets from this time. This is a 1936. Or is it? It might be a 38. We'll find out in a minute. Standard 40-50 tank with the two-way flush handle. And this is the bowl that came with that toilet. Gosh, that base, the shape of that base and the pedestal is just perfect. You gotta love a Modernus. Well, sorry about the shadow. That was the logo that was used in the 30s. Yeah, I got snow all packed in there. So, well, let's start with the bowl. You can see that this is a 14-inch rough-in Modernus. That means that the center of the waste pipe was roughed in 14 inches away from the wall when this toilet was installed. Now, there were different rough-ins available. Occasionally you'll see a 12-inch rough-in version. And 12 inch is the common toilet rough-in today, and it has been standard since the 30s. The 12-inch rough-in is a little bit farther, longer in the back, and you'll also notice the difference between the flange holes and the seat bolt holes. On a 12-inch rough-in toilet, they would be close to on top of each other. And then even much rarer is the 10-inch rough-in version, which is way longer in the back. And there even was an 18-inch rough-in version, which would have the drain, that outlet horn would be right in the center. They did make them probably for replacement, because in the early 1900s there were some crazy rough-ins like 16 and 18 inches. So, yeah. Just trying to think of some of the different versions that I've seen. I've seen a lot of these things on the net. This was the basic form of the Modernus for a long time. Vintage Toilets Vermont has a 1959 Modernus, which is much later. You can check it out on his channel. It has some porcelain missing from there, like this is hollowed out. One thing that's cool about standard toilets from this time is the rim is real thick around the bolt holes. The water from the rim actually flows around that bolt hole. And on 59, they kind of hollowed it out, and it wasn't like that anymore. The later Modernus bowls also were a little bit deeper in the front. I think there are minor differences in the the bowl front as well, but that little bit of extra depth on the front was one thing I remembered about the much later modernist bowls. And I want to point out this date stamp here. Now this toilet has a normal date stamp. It's under the snow, but it's there on the base. And it's a 1938. I can't remember the month or the day. And then, trying to get that out of the shadow. Well, maybe you can see it. You see a K8, it's actually stamped twice. Well, in this case, the K stands for Kokomo, Indiana. So that was the plant where this toilet was made. The 8 means 1938. And Standard started using that code, I believe in 1932 is the earliest I've seen it. And I think 32 is also the first year for the Modernists. Now, in the 30s, that keeps wanting to go in and out of focus. I'm just going to back out. In the 30s, and I want to point this out because if you find these toilets, you can possibly identify them if they're old enough without even lifting the tank cover off, or if it's a flushometer version. In the 30s, they used a letter in the beginning for the plant, and then a single digit for the year in the decade of the 1930s that the toilet was made. So the K is for Kokomo, the 8 is for 1936. Now in the 40s, they simply reversed these characters. If this was a 1948, for example, there would be an 8 at the beginning, followed by the K. The 1940 standard bearing urinal that I used to have had a 0P, which was, the 0 was for 1940, and the P was for, what means it was made in the Standard Pacific plant in Richmond, California. And then in the 50s and later, they went back to putting the plant letter first, followed by 2 digits for the decade and the year that the toilet was made. So starting in 1950, if this toilet had been a 1950, it would say K50 and so on. But here's something kind of cool. In the 30s and 40s, this date stamp was always put pretty much on the back of the toilet. So on this Modernist, it's here. On a standard Madbrook or a Cyecto, it would be in the same spot. On the 40s Cadet that I used to have, it was in this same spot, in the back of the toilet. On the 1946 standard Madeira that I used to have, it was in the same spot. You know, the Madeira has the trapway sticking out past the seat bolt holes. That stamp would be on the 45-degree angle right behind the seat bolt. If the toilet is old enough to have it, that's where you'll find it. So that's kind of cool. If these toilets are old enough, you can date them just by looking behind the bowl. I think that's pretty much with... I think that's all I want to go over with the bowl. And now the tank. I love the style of these tanks. I tend to like toilets from, the 30s to the 50s with the 45-degree lines more than I do. Like the really old stuff tends to be all round. I mean, it's cool looking, but this is more my style. So I'll take the lid off. here. Yeah. See, there's a May 7, 1936 F4050. That's the model of this tank. There is the K6. So this is actually a 1936 tank lid, whereas the bowl was a 38. Then you've got that single breather hole. And the tank itself is also K6. And let me see if I can get this turned around. Okay, this is kind of precarious, but you can see on the back there's a May 15th, 1936, made in USA, 4050. And here is what the two-way flush handle looks like. And you can see it raises the tank ball either way. It works better one way than it does the other. This way, the leverage is not as good. It works better this way. That tank ball is stuck open. Well, it's actually frozen. That's how your lift wires work. Douglas flush valve, and then you can't see that very well, but that is not the original valve that was in this tank, but that is a period correct standard ball cock. And then you can see the copper bowl refill tube, which is pretty much how they were back then, and the copper tank float. When I got this tank, it had an old Mansfield 09 fill valve in it. And here we have the 4060 tank. Now, the 4050 is right there. This is the tank. This is called a 6-gallon tank. That's the tank that would have been standard on a Standard Modernus, or the Cyacto, or the Madbrook. Those were all considered either wash down or reverse trap toilets, so the 6-gallon tank was standard with that type of toilet. If you were talking about a tank flush Madeira or a Devoro of that time, those toilets would have come with an 8-gallon tank, looked just like this, called the 4070 tank. So you had the 4050 6-gallon and the 4070 8-gallon, all in that style. The 4060 tank was the tank that came with, well, it was from the 20s. It came with the Ejecto or the Cyacto of the 1920s. And it's a 6-gallon tank as well. The 8-gallon version for the Devoro of the 20s and some other toilets. There were other tanks as well, but they're not that common. The 8-gallon version of this was the 4080 tank. And I don't have one of those. I've actually got two 4050 tanks, although the other one's got a crack in it. And I've got two 4060 tanks, and they're both perfect. So this is the correct standard flush handle for a 4060 tank. Two-way handle. And these tanks are heavy. This tank weighs more than a Modernus bowl. And fun fact, this tanklet, well, you can see 4060. Now these older standards, it says standard Tiffin. That means that this piece was made in Tiffin, Ohio. And fun fact, this tank lid was made on February 31st, 1928. Which is a fake day. That was a mistake. And this tank has a Douglas valve in it that's not original. And that's a Mansfield 09 that I found on eBay. These actually are pretty easy to find, and some of them are vintage, still in the box. But you can still buy them new as well. It's got just a plastic refill tube. And here is the two-way handle mechanism on the 4060 tank, and I think it works better than the Modernus. This one actually has a roller bearing underneath the lever. Works much smoother than the one on the 4050 tank. That one doesn't have the bearing, it's just metal on metal. And I have a flapper in this one. I don't have a ball and lift wires, although that would be more correct. You know, it's interesting, if you notice such things, there's just something different about the feel of a toilet flush handle when there's a tank ball and lift wires in it. It gives kind of like a satisfying pop when you flush it that you don't get with a flapper. You can see this thing is thick. Glazed on the inside. Both of these tanks are glazed on the inside, so they're very easy to clean. This one did not look like this when I got it. It was very dirty, but it cleaned up beautifully. Okay. Wow, this is a long video, but hope you enjoyed. I might have a little surprise at the end. Hang on. Okay, guys, we're back. This is my other 4050 tank. And you'll notice, first thing, let's see, this is I actually think this tank is a 1931, which is significant. Something else about this tank, interestingly, it's not as heavy as my other 4050 tank. I think I weighed them, and there was like a 10-pound difference, which is weird. This one has the same two-way handle, but it's porcelain. And you can see the design is actually more like the 20s handle. And I like it better than the later chrome version because it has that bearing underneath. You can see there are the lift wires in the tank ball. And this valve, you're not going to be able to see it very well, but that is a new old stock brass fill valve that I got. I actually got it in a Craigslist buy with some other toilets a long time ago, and there were two of these brand new in the box. In fact, they came in the box. The copper bowl refill tube hadn't been bent like that or anything, so I actually refurbished this tank. But there wasn't much point because it has a crack in the back. I actually tried to fix it, but it still leaks. So probably going to have to junk this tank, unfortunately. But it was a fun project anyway. I can put those parts in another tank. And Here are the stamps on this tank. See, this tank doesn't have, it's a 19th, yeah, it's August 31st, 1931. So it says Trenton on it because this toilet was made in Trenton, New Jersey. Had this toilet been made in 1932, it would have said M2. For some reason, the M designation was used for the Trenton plant in later years. And that's going to wrap up this video, guys. So, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you later.